Hello and welcome to the November In Learning Partnership event, National STEM Day, a collaboration between Keep Indiana Learning, the Indiana Department of Education, and the Indiana Learning Lab powered by 5-Star. My name is Alicia Four, Digital Learning Specialist for the Indiana Department of Education's Digital Learning team, and I am excited to kick today's events off with a rebroadcast of CS is the T in STEM. A few reminders as we get started before we jump into Dana Calfee's presentation. If you would like to receive PGP points for viewing this session today, stick around at the end and a 5-Star representative will be back to provide you with a code to redeem your points in the lab. Also, we have 3 live sessions that will be aired in the Indiana Learning Lab directly following this first broadcast. The 10th anniversary of Hour of Code will begin at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, a session all about the Indiana STEM cadre at 12 p.m. Eastern, and Forging Our Future to look at how we can align education with workforce needs at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We will wrap up today's partnership events with a rebroadcast of Dana Calfee's Supporting STEM Integration Across Content Areas specific to STEM and ELA at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you again for being a part of this In Learning partner event, and we hope you enjoy the sessions today.
So I'm really excited that we're finally here for Computer Science is the T in STEM. My name is Dana Calfee, and I am a STEM and computer science specialist here at the department. And I just want to say that sometimes when we do PD with IDOE, we get to talk about personal passion projects. And so today I'm really happy to be here to talk with you about the growing need to consider the role of computer science in STEM education. So today what you can expect in our agenda is we're going to need to talk a little bit about what is computer science, because there's a lot of ways to think about computer science, and there's some definitions out there that float around. And sometimes people are thrown into the role of teaching or incorporating computer science without ever even considering what it is. So we're going to start off talking about that. And then we're going to do some thinking to connect computer science to STEM, and then we'll debrief and go over some ideas for next steps at the very end. So like I said, first of all, there's just lots of definitions for computer science, and sometimes it's a good idea to just pause for a second and identify what you believe the definition is. So right off the bat, we're going to start with a little interaction with a Mentimeter, and there's a code on the screen. You can go to menti.com and enter that code, or you can use the QR code and participate that way. Additionally, I am going to throw the link in the chat if that makes it easier for you as well. But I would like for us to just take a look at what we think that definition of computer science is. So go ahead, and I'll pause for a moment and let you all participate. Learning languages and algorithms that make computers work. Love the use of the word algorithm. What else do we have there? Oz behind the curtain, great. Coding and other systems like that. It is interesting. I wonder what the Wizard of Oz would be like if there really were like a big computer displays, behind the curtain. What would that be? Problem solving. CS pulls the science and math of STEM together. Love it. Computer science is learning algorithms to communicate with computers to facilitate the world around us. I love that idea of facilitation. It's really great. Wonderful. Problem solving and computational thinking. Excellent. All right, well, I appreciate you learning how computers work and how they're used in everyday life. Wonderful. All right, so I love it that there were so many different ways that we were thinking about computer science. In 2006, this was a definition, a pretty popular definition of computer science. And so notice there was, algorithmic processes were there, but also thinking about hardware and software and their implementation and impact on society. And so this was a pretty succinct definition included in the K-12 computer science framework when that was developed to help inform computer science education in the K-12 space. And so this is a popular definition that you'll see, the Tucker definition, right? If you fast forward to 2022, this definition that we get from the Encyclopedia Britannica, this is how they report computer science. So you'll notice that the definition here is expanded and actually talks about computer science applying principles of math and engineering and logic to lots of different functions. And so we still have that algorithmic thinking, we still have that nod to software and hardware development, but now we're also including things like artificial intelligence. And so in this newer, more developed definition, we do begin to see sort of this idea that computer science might just be connected to some of these other STEM disciplines. So in Indiana, this is what computer science instruction looks like in the K-8 space, at least. So based on data from the annual technology plan survey, you can see that computer science instruction happens in several different ways. And so if you're thinking about those bars on the graph, we've got standalone computer science classes in the K-8 space, but we also have rotations, kids rotating through different, like their different specials. We have it integrated in subject area, and then we also have a distinction for computer science just being integrated in science. And so when you think about that integration in science, it's kind of like, okay, so maybe there's a connection there to STEM. So if we're going to consider the connection between computer science and STEM, we need to take the same close look at how we think about STEM, because again, STEM is one of those things that has multiple perspectives and multiple ways to think about it as well. So did you know, for example, that when you think about how long this idea of STEM has been around, back in 1862, there was an act that created land-grant universities to promote agricultural science, to improve farming methods and improve the way that we could feed our population, that later led to some of the earliest engineering programs that were offered in our country. The STEM acronym used to be SMET. It wasn't always STEM. So in the early 2000s, it was called the acronym was organized in a different way. And then in 2005, that was the first time that a couple of our US representatives created the STEM caucus in Congress. And there was a federal look at how are we going to promote and develop STEM. And then around the time that was happening, there was this distinction that STEM, it includes these 4 specific disciplines, and we're really gonna think about using these in an applied approach to solve problems. So STEM can mean something completely different depending on your perspective. So if as a science teacher, I know, and a department chair, before I came to the Department of Education, I just remember a lot of our conversations would be like, we do STEM, we do that. My science teachers would say, yeah, we do STEM. And the math teachers would say, yeah, we do STEM. And in the STEM lab, they would say, yeah, we're doing STEM. And so what does that mean exactly? And what we find is that it kind of depends. Are you in the camp where you're still thinking of STEM as 4 discrete subject areas? Or if you're thinking about STEM as integrated interdisciplinary problem solving of, relevant real world problems, how does that look if you're a science teacher? What are you focusing on? And then what does the lens look like if you're a math teacher? Um, and so how you approach STEM and the development of STEM mindsets sort of depends on the perspective from which you approach it, which makes sense, really. So it's no surprise that it's there. But what happens then is when you think about where does computer science fit in, then you're going to have multiple definitions for that as well. Is any one of these the right way over another way? Not necessarily, but we do in order to move forward and to help people and to help move beyond just accelerating STEM, we do need to help have some conversations about how these different disciplines impact the way that we think about real world problem solving. So the U.S. Department of Education, of course, weighs in as well. And the U.S. Department of Education has sort of an evolving way in how they incorporate computer science and STEM. And so in the U.S. Department of Education sort of STEM plan, this is this is how they refer to STEM and computer science. It's STEM slash computer science. So it's not necessarily, it's STEM and computer science, and these disciplines all collectively fit together, and now we have STEM slash CS. So, so here there's a nod at the federal level to say that computer science belongs in this space, but how does it really fit in? It doesn't really fit in the acronym, so we're just going to put a slash and call it STEM CS. So what happens then is when when we start to acknowledge that yes, computer science obviously has a place in STEM, when we start to acknowledge that, then then we begin to see this common practice of computers being used sort of as a tool in STEM education rather than really being integrated in terms of the way computer scientists think being very similar to the way that people in STEM fields think. And so when you begin to just use computers as tools in the STEM space, you're really just beginning to scratch the surface of possibilities of technology. And so, unless you have a conversation like the one we're having here and begin to think. So what are your thoughts? This is a point where I would love it if you would put in the chat or if you would come off mute if you want to participate in that way. But what are your thoughts? Is this type of computer science where computers are just used as tools? Is that STEM or is that computer science? What do you think?
I definitely don't think just saying, well, we're going to do this unit and we're going to, use a computer and we're going to use a spreadsheet. I definitely don't think that to me means that we're integrating computer science or STEM or anything. It's just a tool. It's just our vehicle to get there. So to me, the ideas of having computer science in my lessons or doing, or making sure that I'm integrating STEM goes beyond that.
I appreciate you sharing that, Alicia. And it kind of goes along with what I'm seeing in the chat here, that it seems like STEM involves more of a problem solving approach. And you have some agreement in the chat as well from Jessica. Brenda as well agrees. And so I think that there it is. I think we have, there seems to be a lot of agreement that just using computers in the STEM space is not necessarily um, is not necessarily STEM, right? So how then can we move beyond just that, and how can we help people understand that level of integration addresses those things like inquiry that I'm seeing in the chat or the problem solving pieces. So I love where you guys are heading. I love where you're heading with this part of the conversation. So let's take a look then, and let's just spend a couple of minutes then investigating that. And I'd like for you to just look at this slide that I have here, and I know there's a lot of information, so I'm actually going to just talk for a second, but then I'm going to pause and um, let you really digest here. But remember, STEM involves all these different types of thinking. So if you're looking at it from the science perspective, then you've got these practices, these science and engineering practices that drive that three-dimensional phenomena-based instruction and the science standards. But then math also has its counterpart. It has its own process standards as well. And if you kind of take these and look at them next to each other and then compare them to 21st century problem solving or the engineering and design process or ISTE standards. I mean, there's all of these different frameworks for how we can think about STEM, right? So if you're looking at, depending on the perspective from which you operate and think about STEM, your ideas about computer science might be very different, or it might be really challenging to figure out where computer science fits in. And so I just want to pause for a minute and I'm literally going to hold the silence and just want you to investigate what you see on these slides. And I'm going to ask for you to throw in the chat during this quiet time, this quiet reflection and looking at the information on the screen. You can put it in the chat or you can also just come up and discuss with the group if you want to. But if you things like if you were looking at the hitting the highlights of the science and engineering practices, what would they be in that top right hand corner of the slide? What are the big ideas there? And um, and how do those relate to those big ideas that you see in the math process standards or the big concepts or big ideas that you see in the 21st in any of the other models of the 21st century problem solving or the engineering and technology design process or the ISTE standards? Like, what are some of the big themes that you see across all of these STEM processes and practices? So quiet for me now. Think time for you. Throw some things in the chat. Come off mute if you want to, and we'll regroup here in a minute. So we've got lots of different ideas about problem solving, and we have lots of different ideas about doing, like there's action involved. There's I love that all of them seem to focus on or are aligned to postgraduate things that students will need to be able to do post graduation, deeper thinking. Um, there are processes and there's multiple steps in the process. So, regardless of what perspective you operate from in the STEM space, there seems to be some commonality. And so when I choose to think about where computer science fits in, I choose to think about the fact that well, there's two ways I think about it. So number one, I think about how throughout time, technology has always been, we've always thought of technology as something that things that humans create or make to help make life easier or to help solve a problem that needs to be solved. And so, whether you think of technology as a pencil or whether you think of technology as an artificial intelligence, machine learned bot that helps solve problems in your house, whatever the situation might be, technology it changes as the needs of societies change. And so, if it makes sense that if we begin to think about technology, computer science in that technology space, where then how can we align some practices or processes within computer science to these other STEM practices and processes in the same manner that you just did when you were looking at the STEM practices and processes? So of course, I have some more. These are the computer science core practices that are published with the K-8 computer science standards. And so these are some things and these are also included in the framework for K-12 computer science education. And so these are also things that students carry with them. These are practices that carry with them beyond eighth grade into their high school computer science classes. And so when you think about the discussion that we just had about some overarching themes and practices and processes for STEM, where do you see overlap now that you're looking at the computer science practices? So, in other words, when your students are doing STEM, how can computer science practices be incorporated? You can put those in the chat, or you can also um, come off mute and just share. Okay, so there are elements of communication and collaboration on both sides. Got to have both. Defining and solving problems. So you're going to you see that a lot in the STEM space, but you also that's also a big practice with computer science. So in your mind, then, what do you think are the big differences? Where do you see the differences? Or in other words, when you're looking at the computer science core practices and you're thinking, how how could I align that with something in the STEM space? Which one of those practices stand out as something that maybe it might be harder to think about? Developing and using abstractions. I agree with Jessica. Okay. So one of the things that we know is a sort of a next step as we begin to think about this integration between STEM and computer science is clearing up things like developing and using abstractions, right? So when we think about computational thinking, developing and using abstractions is kind of at the core of computational thinking. And so if we were to break it down and say, hey, all we're doing there is we're breaking down a problem into its smallest units, and then we're trying to figure out a way to come up with a solution that we can apply in this situation, but then also apply it in other situations as well. And so how many times do we do that in math? How many times do we do that in science? in the engineering and design process. We develop protocols that we can use to solve similar problems. And that's sort of a connection to developing and using abstractions. And so it's for some of us, it's a learning curve, right? We need to learn a little bit more about computational thinking in order to figure out the ways that we can have our students doing STEM by using computer science and some of these practices to help solve those relevant and real world problems. And so I love it that you said that. Um, and then let's see. So Jessica, I appreciate your comment in the chat. About about where you are in your teaching journey, and also with how you're feeling about computer science. And so I appreciate you being here today. And and this is a space where we want to continue to grow this conversation, and we encourage teachers, especially y'all that are here. We especially encourage teachers to begin to start thinking about, because the standards are both there, right? So if we can begin to start thinking about ways that you can address the computer science standards alongside and integrated and interwoven with science and math, then at the end of the day, that could be very helpful. So I just want to, when I think about why this is so, in my mind, why this is so important, this little short video comes to my mind, and we're going to watch this here together today. All right. So just to wrap up here, I want to make sure that we just stop for a moment and just we think about, as you continue to engage students in STEM work in your classrooms or in your school spaces, we know that it's something that we want to do because it's so highly engaging and students are very willing to participate in things that are hands-on, where they're doing inquiry, where they're creating things. We want to reflect on this perspective, like what perspective are you going to use to approach the work? And so so you got to think, is STEM predominantly math and science with a hint of engineering? Does science inform the types of engineering problems we solve? Do engineering practices help students understand boundaries and constraints? Is it enough to acknowledge that technologies just exist and that we benefit from it? So computer science it's more than just using computers as tools. As STEM education evolves and as we continue to learn more about computer science and how to integrate and use computer science in our classrooms, we want to try to think about how, you know, all aspects of computer science are necessary in order to engage in those real world problem solving skills that are going to eventually meet demands in that ever changing work in that futuristic workforce. And so here at the end, I just want to invite you to reflect and think about how students will benefit if we as educators work to make CS the T in STEM. And just to wrap up, I know there was a couple of questions, and I just want to make sure that we say this and address it with the group. But the computer science framework should be released shortly. Remember that in our implementation timeline, the computer science standards for fourth and sixth grade that will be assessed on the 2023 spring iLearn are the 2016 standards. So they are the previous computer science standards. So when students take the iLearn in the spring of 2023, they will be assessed on the fourth and sixth grade computer science standards from 2016. So that would be the previous computer science standards. They will not be assessed on the new computer science standards until the next administration of iLearn. So remember, this is an implementation year for computer science. And so just to wrap up here, I think we see something. I appreciate that you're looking forward to those resources being available for computer science. I am too. And so as soon as we know the exact release date for those, we'll be putting that out on social media. It'll be your administrators will be alerted through the weekly update from Dr. Jenner, and then there'll be some follow-up supports in the Learning Lab to help unpack some of those frameworks and to make sure that folks are understanding how to implement and use those resources to teach the new standards. And then at the end here, I think students will continue to grow in their abilities to identify problems, try to find solutions, and adjust when things don't work the way they want. And I love that as a wrap up to sort of just kind of a maybe a charge for everyone to consider that if we can try to integrate these computer science ideas and practices in our STEM work with students, then we're going to continue to promote the capacity and build the capacity for kiddos to be better problem solvers and to establish that need to be persistent in pursuing answers and developing solutions and all the things that go along with these processes and practices that we've talked about today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nate. I work on the team that brings you the Indiana Learning Lab, and I wanted to show you how you can redeem your professional growth hours for attending today's live stream. The code that is on your screen is what you are going to need to jot down or take a screenshot of. It's STEM19. That is the code that you're going to want to enter in the Indiana Learning Lab to redeem your professional growth hours for today. So to do that, if you've not done that before, you log into your Indiana Learning Lab account. You select Learning from the main navigation at the top, then select Live, then the blue button that says Redeem Learning Code. From there, you're going to enter STEM 19, and that will earn your professional growth hours. If you need any help doing that, you can always use the live chat feature in the lab to reach out to our team to help you through that process.